Welcome back to the Untold Stories, exclusive before start the story now. Subscribe to the channel. And comment down where you're from and what time it is for you right now. Now, turn off the lights, settle in, and let the darkness speak. I first came upon Boone Hollow by accident or by something colder than chance. The year was 1890. Though it feels like a lifetime away now. I'd been sent from Charleston to survey the ridges for new rail lines. But the valley that lay between those mountains was never marked on any map. I carried Dot. It was a place locals spoke of softly Boone Hollow. A notch in the earth where sound itself seemed to lose its way. The moment my horse descended the switchback trail, I knew something was wrong. The air grew heavier, quieter. Even the crows refused to follow. When the wind blew, it didn't whistle, it moaned. As though it had a memory. That was where I first heard the name. Bartlett Farm. The people of Boone Hollow. There wasn't much to Boone Hollow. A sawmill by the creek. A handful of homesteads scattered along the ridge. And a church that had no pastor since the summer before. The folks there lived slow. Heavy lives men with faces carved from ash. Women whose hands looked older than their years. They watched me with the suspicion reserved for outsiders. No one spoke unless spoken to, and when they did, it came out as more of a warning than a welcome. It was old Mrs. Crane at the post office who first whispered about the Bartletts. Her voice was dry as parchment when she said, "You're bound for the ridge, are you? Then you'll see their place. Don't go past sundown. The ground there remembers too much." She didn't elaborate. No one ever did. But I'd come too far, and curiosity has a cruel way of feeling like duty. The Bartlett family. Thomas Bartlett was a farmer, plain, stern, and God-fearing by reputation. He'd come from Virginia 10 years prior, bought the high ridge for next to nothing, and built a farmhouse of gray oak that still stood defiant against the mountain wind. He lived there with his wife, Eliza, and their daughter, Mary, a quiet girl of 12 who, as rumor went, had her mother's touch and her father's temper. The Bartletts didn't come to town often. When they did, they traded in silence salt pork, beeswax, and something else. Bundles of roots and herbs wrapped in muslin, marked with charcoal signs no one could read. Eliza's hands always smelled faintly of rosemary and bloodroot. Some said she was a healer, others said she was the reason no preacher stayed more than a season in Boone Hollow. The unwelcome cold. The first snow came early that year. By November, the ridges were white and the creeks were iron. It was the kind of winter that pressed the breath out of every living thing. When I passed the Bartlett farm for the first time, it looked wrong. Not abandoned, just too still. The trees around it leaned inward, as if bending to listen. The fence posts were black with frost, and in the fields stood the silhouettes of cattle. Motionless in the half-light, I called out a greeting, but no one answered. Only the wind moved, and even that felt cautious. That night, at the boarding house in town, the mill foreman told me a story. He said that every winter, like clockwork, the Bartlett's animals died. Horses, cows, chickens, all of them. No sign of sickness, no sign of attack. Just stopped living. When I asked what they did with the bodies, he looked down at his boots. "They bury 'em," he said. "But come thaw, you'll not find a one. Earth takes 'em back whole." He wouldn't say more. The letter in the snow 2 nights later. As I surveyed the ridge north of town, I found a scrap of paper pressed into the ice. The ink had bled from the snow, but I could still read a few lines. It was written in a trembling hand. "It hums again tonight, beneath the boards, like a throat that won't rest. I have buried the ring, but fear it knows me by name." There was no signature. But on the back, in faint graphite, someone had scrawled 3 initials, T.B. Thomas Bartlett. The visit. I rode to the Bartlett farm the next morning. The sky was white as bone, and frost clung to the trees like old lace. As I neared the fence, the horse stopped short, nostrils flaring, muscles trembling. No matter how I coaxed, It refused to step forward. I walked the rest of the way on foot, every crunch of snow under my boots felt too loud. No smoke rose from the chimney. The windows were curtained with frost. But I could see movement inside a flicker of shadow. Or perhaps reflection. Eliza Bartlett answered the door. She was a thin woman, hair gray before its time, eyes the color of tarnished brass. Her hands were wrapped in linen, and when she spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "It's not safe once the ground hardens." She wouldn't let me inside. But through the crack in the door, I glimpsed something strange. A small wooden box, open on the table, lined with salt and filled with what looked like black roots, twisted together like fingers. I asked if Thomas was home. She hesitated, then said quietly, "He's digging again." The sound beneath the earth. I found him behind the barn, knee-deep in a pit that steamed despite the cold. The earth was darker there, almost wet, though no thaw had come. He didn't look up when I called to him, when he finally did. His face was hollow, eyes sunk deep as though he hadn't slept in weeks. "Soil's wrong here," he muttered. "Turns itself over, roots twist down. Not up. Can't plant, can't bury. You dig one thing, you find another." He thrust his shovel into the earth and leaned on it, staring at the ground like a man listening for a voice. Then, very softly, he said, "It remembers." That was when I heard it, a faint vibration underfoot, not the rumble of water or wind, something slower, living, a rhythm, almost like breath. I stepped back, but Thomas didn't move. He only said, "Best not stand too close. It likes the warmth." The first death by mid-December. The town had heard what happened at Bartlett Farm. The mare, the only horse they had left, was found in the paddock, stiff as stone, not frozen, not slaughtered. Just standing, lifeless, as if some unseen hand had wrung the soul out of it. The vet from Logan County rode out to examine her, but when he returned, his beard was white with sweat. He wouldn't speak of what he saw, except to say, "That animal's heart never stopped, it just emptied." They buried the mare that afternoon. By dawn the next day, the earth above her grave had sunk, as though something had swallowed the coffin from below. Mary Bartlett saw the girl. Mary, only once. She was standing by the window when I passed by the farm again. Her hands pressed against the glass. Her eyes followed me as I rode by, not curious, not afraid, just watchful. At the edge of the fence, I found a little rag doll caught on the wire. It was stuffed with dried flowers and something darker ash. Maybe. On its cloth chest, stitched in red thread, were the words, "Sleep beneath." That night I couldn't rest, even miles away. I thought I heard the same low humming, rising through the boards of my floor, the warning by Christmas Eve. I decided to leave Boone Hollow, but when I went to settle my board, the innkeeper stopped me. She said a letter had come for me that morning, hand-delivered. No postmark. The envelope smelled faintly of smoke and earth. Inside was a single line written in the same trembling hand as the note I'd found in the snow. "When the ground sings, stay inside." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. That night, I dreamed of the Bartlett farm, the frozen cattle standing silent in the moonlight, and Thomas kneeling in the pit, whispering into the dirt like a man confessing to the dead. When I woke, I could still hear the humming, distant but constant, a heartbeat beneath the mountain, waiting for spring. When I left the Bartlett farm that first time, I thought I was walking away from a sad story, a family cursed by bad soil, by grief, or by superstition. But Boone Hollow has a way of keeping its hands on you, even miles away. That place clung to the mind like smoke that won't wash out of your clothes. The humming in the ground, it began the night after Christmas. The boarding house walls were thin, the floors warped, and the wind found its way through every gap. But what woke me wasn't the cold, it was the humming. Not outside, not above, beneath. It came faintly at first, a steady rhythmic sound rising from under the boards of my room. Not the wind, Not the creak. It pulsed like something breathing through the earth itself. I pressed my ear to the floor. And then I heard it, words, half-formed and wet, like speech bubbling through water. I couldn't make them out. But one word repeated again and again, below. The sound grew louder until my lantern flickered out. The glass chilled in my hand, and when I struck a match, the flame bent toward the floorboards as though drawn by something unseen. When morning came, the humming was gone, but the boards where I'd lain my ear were warm, returned to the ridge. I should have left Boone Hollow that day. But I couldn't. There's a sickness in curiosity, the kind that feels like duty, or penance. By the week's end, I was back on the ridge. The Bartlett farm looked the same, only quieter. No prints in the snow but mine. The barn doors were open, swinging slow in the wind. Inside, the air was wrong. Cold, but not the clean kind of cold that bites the skin. This was thick, heavy like the air in a tomb, and then I saw them. Every stall stood full. Cattle, horses, sheep, each one upright, eyes open. Their bodies stiff and gray. Frost clung to their coats in perfect outlines. No rot. No wounds, just death frozen mid-breath. I called out, but no one answered. At the far end of the barn, a lantern hung low, casting light on a wooden door that led down into the root cellar. The humming was louder there. The cellar. I descended the steps slowly. The air grew warmer with every foot I took. The walls were slick, the dirt weeping with condensation. And there, in the center of the cellar, was Thomas Bartlett. He knelt beside a stone lid embedded in the floor, carved with symbols I didn't know. His hands were bleeding, his nails cracked from digging. He looked up at me, startled, and whispered, "It's awake." I asked him what it was. "The old thing," he said. "The ground here, it's not just earth. It's a mouth. It feeds when it's cold." He showed me a ledger, the kind a farmer keeps for his animals. But the pages weren't marked with numbers or prices. Each line held a name, the livestock that had died, written neatly with dates beside them. Every seventh name was crossed out in red ink. When I asked why, he closed the book slowly and said, "Those it takes whole. No bone, no blood. It remembers who fed it. The buried ring." I asked him about the letter I'd found, the one that mentioned a ring. He froze. Then, after a moment, he pointed toward a pile of stones near the cellar wall. "Buried it there," he muttered. "Too late, though. Once you unearth what sleeps, it knows your voice. You can't unteach the ground your name." He wiped his hands on his shirt, leaving black streaks like soot. "Don't tell Eliza," he said. "She thinks prayer will keep it. But the prayers go down, not up." I turned to leave, but he called after me, "If it calls for you, don't answer." The humming swelled, shaking dust from the rafters. I climbed out of that cellar as fast as I could, the sound rising like a storm behind me. When I reached the surface, the air split with a noise like thunder. And beneath my feet, I swear the ground moved as if something vast had turned in its sleep. The ledger that night. I stayed in the abandoned church outside town. The sheriff had closed it. Years before, after lightning struck the steeple, the pews were split, the bell rope half burned. I sat by candlelight and opened my field journal, writing everything I could remember. Thomas's words, the ledger, the sound. But when I reached for my pen, there was already writing on the next page. I hadn't put it there. "If you read this, it knows you too." The ink was fresh, still glistening in the light, and beneath that, in faint script, "Beneath Boone Hollow." It hums, soft heart-like thumping sound under the next few lines. I left the church before dawn. Eliza's prayer, when I returned to the Bartlett farm the next morning. Thomas was gone. Eliza was sitting on the porch, eyes red and distant. The door behind her was nailed shut. She looked at me and said, "He went to bury it deeper." Said it was calling his name through the frost. She held something in her hands, a rosary. but not made of beads. Small bones, strung together with twine. You can pray, she whispered. But the ground listens better. I asked where Mary was. Eliza just pointed toward the barn, the child in the barn inside. The humming was louder than ever, almost like music now. Mary stood by the stalls, holding the little rag doll I'd seen before. She looked at me with calm, hollow eyes. Then she spoke. Mama says the soil remembers what you feed it. Papa says it's hungry again. I asked her if she knew where her father had gone. She smiled faintly. A child's smile without warmth. He went under. I took a step back. The floor beneath the barn was trembling. From the far stall, the frozen mare began to crack, ice fracturing down her legs, eyes dripping water. And from beneath the hay, the ground split open like a mouth. I ran, the digging. By the time I reached town, the snow had turned black. The air reeked of iron. Every animal in Boone Hollow, dogs, oxen, even the birds had gone silent. The sheriff gathered 6 men and rode back with me that night. When we reached the farm, the house was dark, the windows shattered. The snow around the barn had melted in a perfect circle, steam rising into the night. Inside the cellar, the stone lid was gone. The hole beneath was wide enough to swallow a wagon. The sheriff shone his lantern down, but the light didn't reach the bottom. From the depths came a faint whisper, the same voice I'd heard beneath the floorboards days before. It said my name. Below, we sealed the cellar with timber and stone that night, but as we worked, we could hear something moving underneath, dragging itself deeper into the dark. When dawn came, the earth was still again, but the snow around the house had turned red. The disappearance 2 days later. Boone Hollow emptied. Families packed what they could and fled the valley. Those who stayed swore the ground moved at night, that the fences shifted, the barns leaned, the wells filled with black water. No one saw the Bartletts again. Only the sound remained, a low humming that carried on the wind every evening. Just before sunset, I left my maps behind when I rode out. But sometimes, when the nights are long and the wind turns low, I still hear it faint, rising from the floor like breath. And I remember what Thomas Bartlett said before he vanished. Once you dig through the frost, you'll find the thing that feeds on warmth. When winter broke, Boone Hollow didn't thaw, it bled. The ice along the creek ran red-brown, thick with mud and something darker. No one spoke of it. The few that remained said it was just clay runoff. But clay doesn't hum. I had left for Charleston by then. But sleep offered no peace. The dreams were worse than the valley itself, the ground breathing beneath me. Names written in red ink, and a hand scratching at my window from the inside of the glass. By March, I couldn't stay away any longer. Something inside me needed to know what the Bartletts had uncovered. So I went back. The abandoned hollow, the road into Boone Hollow was half swallowed by mud. Every tree along the ridge leaned as if pushed by an invisible weight. The air stank of rust and rain. The mill was silent. The church bell lay cracked in the snowmelt, its rope blackened to dust. Only one building still stood untouched, the Bartlett house. Its roof sagged. Its windows were black. But it hadn't fallen like the others. It waited. I tied my horse at the fence and crossed the yard. Underfoot, the ground felt soft, too soft, like walking on wet cloth. The front door hung ajar. Inside, the air was thick with mold and salt. And there, on the kitchen table, lay the ledger. It wasn't just a farmer's book anymore. The pages were swollen with damp. But the ink had not faded, every line written with a steady hand. Every 7th name crossed out in red, and beside those names, a date, each one corresponding to the coldest night of that winter. But it wasn't just Livestock anymore. Halfway through the book, the names changed. They were people. The names, the first I recognized was Caleb Ross, the farmhand who had written of the humming before he vanished. Then Reverend Hollis, the preacher who'd left Boone Hollow a year before, supposedly bound for Kentucky. And then, a final entry. E. Bartlett. Her name wasn't crossed out yet. My hands shook. I turned the page blank at first glance, but when the lantern flickered low, I saw faint indentations on the paper. Someone had written something, then torn the top sheet away. I took a piece of charcoal from the stove and rubbed it gently over the page. Words appeared. Rising from the blank, it doesn't die. It only trades. Every seventh life keeps it sleeping. The handwriting was not Thomas's. It was Mary's. Mary's doll. I found her doll in the parlor, sitting upright on the mantel. The same one I'd seen before, but now its stitching had come undone. Inside, instead of straw and herbs, were 7 small teeth and a folded scrap of cloth. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a page from a hymnal. Words scrawled over the notes in a child's hand. Sleep beneath, where roots grow hearts and hearts grow teeth. The handwriting looped wildly, almost joyful. I heard something upstairs, light steps. Like a child's feet on wood, I called her name. Though I knew she couldn't be alive, the sound stopped. Then from the corner of the room, a soft voice. Mama says don't wake it. The air went still. The lantern dimmed. When I turned, no one was there. Only footprints in the dust, small, bare, leading toward the cellar door. The second descent, the boards over the cellar had been pried loose. The stone lid was gone, shattered, and the pit below was wider now, lined with salt that had melted into sludge. The air was damp, pulsing with low heat. And from the depths, a faint whisper. Below. Below. I should have left. God knows I should have sealed the door and burned the house, but there was a rope ladder nailed into the earth, and a lantern burning halfway down. Someone had been here recently. I descended. The walls of the pit were slick with black moss that glimmered faintly, like wet glass. The smell was sweet and rotting like fruit left in the sun. At the bottom lay what looked like a cave. But the walls weren't stone. They were roots, enormous, gnarled, pulsing with a slow rhythm like veins. In the center, something waited. A circle of stones arranged around a hollow, and within that hollow, a mound that breathed. It was wrapped in burlap and rope. But beneath the cloth, something moved, a steady heave. Like lungs, carved into the surrounding roots, were words in a language I didn't know. But one phrase repeated over and over, fed sevenfold. The thing that spoke. I don't know how long I stood there, or if I even breathed. The air was thick, vibrating with sound not from outside, but from inside my chest. It was as if the earth was speaking through my bones. Then, from the burlap mound, a crack, slow and wet. A hand slid free. It wasn't a hand like ours. Gray, bark like skin, fingers long and thin as branches. The nails were black, and from them dripped soil that moved like blood. The hand pressed against the earth and pulled itself up. And through the cloth came a voice, not spoken, but thought. You fed me names. I remember yours. I turned and scrambled up the ladder. The earth beneath me pulsed, shaking the timbers, the sound rising until it filled my skull. At the top, I burst through the floorboards, gasping. The cellar collapsed behind me. A sound like a sigh. When I ran outside, dawn was breaking, and from the barn came singing high, slow and childlike, the song. Mary stood in the doorway. Her doll clutched to her chest. Her hair hung wet, her eyes clouded white. It's not hungry anymore, she said. It has what it needs. I asked her what that meant. She only smiled. Mama said the ground must eat to keep us safe, but it never liked the taste of animals. I stepped forward, but the snow around my boots began to sink, bubbling like boiling water. Beneath it, I could see movement, roots twisting, pulling something down. Eliza Bartlett's rosary of bones lay half buried at Mary's feet. Where's your mother? I asked. Mary tilted her head. She went to feed the roots. Then she stepped backward into the barn. The doors slammed shut. From inside came Sound of earth tearing open and a scream that didn't end. The ledger burns. I rode from that place before the sun fully rose. When I reached the ridge, I turned back only once. Smoke rose from the Bartlett farm, not black, but white, like fog. I kept the ledger with me. I should have destroyed it. But I COULDN single quotes T. Somehow I believed it might be proof of what happened, of what I saw. I brought it to a reverend in Charleston, a man who'd studied the old Appalachian tongues, remnants of the early settlers, mixed with something far older. He read the phrase "fed sevenfold" aloud and went pale. "That's not English," he said. "That's from before English. It means the ground is memory." He shut the book and told me to leave it with him. I did. 3 days later, his church collapsed into the earth. They never found his body. The humming returns. It's been months since I left Boone Hollow, but the sound never left me. Some nights, the floorboards in my room still hum. The walls breathe. And in my dreams, I see the ledger pages turning by themselves, each one filling with new names written in red ink. Sometimes I wake to find my hands stained with dirt. Once, I found a single tooth on my windowsill. A child's tooth. The last entry in the ledger was unfinished when I saw it last. Just one line waiting to be filled. I dream of that empty line, and sometimes I see the letters begin to appear. My own name, slow and deliberate, written in a hand I don't recognize. I left Boone Hollow, but Boone Hollow did not leave me. The city did what cities do, covered the earth with brick and called it safe. Men shouted in the markets. Trains screamed along the rails. The smoke was thick enough to pass for weather. Noise should drown memory, but the hum threaded through it, all a single tone, low and patient, as if the ground itself had set a note and meant to hold it until I answered. I kept my boots by the door, caked with the hollow's mud. I should have scrubbed them clean. Instead, I watched the clay crack and darken in the heat, the way old blood dries. When the sun hit just so, the mud gleamed, and for a moment I convinced myself it shifted. The ledger was gone, taken by the reverend who never returned. But the weight of the ledger remained, the heft of names that had never belonged to paper. I tried to draw a map from memory. Roads, fences, the angle of the ridge. Each line I set to the page bowed. Like saplings in an unseen wind, I put the pencil down when I realized I was not drawing a place. I was tracing a mouth. The letters that found May did not tell anyone what I had seen. Told myself silence was safety, but the quiet starves a man. The first letter found me at the boarding house. Hand delivered, no postmark. As before, I turned it over 3 times before I dared open it. Inside was a single slip of paper, thin as onion skin, already damp as if pulled from a damp wall. "You left something under the church." No signature, no address. A second letter arrived a week later, tucked beneath my plate at breakfast. 7th names belong to the Theua ground. The ground keeps what it is owed. I carried both in my coat until the edges turned soft. I told myself, some wretch in Charleston meant to frighten me. Then, the 3rd letter arrived, and the handwriting was Mary's, round, eager, too careful where a child ought to be careless. "You did not say goodbye." I sat with that note until the light drained from the day. When I rose, the floor bent under my step. I told myself it was rot in the boards. I told myself many things. The house that tilted a month to the day after the reverend's church fell. The boarding house leaned. Not visibly, not in a way that would trouble a carpenter, but plates slid a finger's width toward the window. The wash water settled at one end of the basin. A marble dropped to test the thing I dared not name, rolled slow and patient to the south wall, and tapped once as a knuckle taps a door. I spent that night in the streets. The cobbles were warm even after midnight. The river stank and whispered. the way moving water always does when men stand alone beside it. At dawn, I found a note tucked into the brim of my hat. Come home. No envelope this time. The page was torn from a ledger. Found testimony, I the blacksmith's boy. March 3rd, 1888. I asked questions for weeks. In the markets, by the train yard where the men drifted between towns. To any soul who had worked the hollows or crossed the ridge roads by night. Most turned their faces away. The few who spoke talked the way sober men do when they fear drink, hating their need to let words out. A blacksmith's boy, not yet old enough to shave, sat with me by the rail fence behind St. Aloysius. His hands were burned in the way that belongs to someone else's work. I went with my father to Boone Hollow 2 winters past, he said. A plowshare cracked. Man named Bartlett ordered a new one and wanted it delivered at night. We rode out late. Frost thick as salt. The ground it looked slept on. Not by beast, by weight. When we reached the farm, the man Bartlett wouldn't meet our eyes. He checked the iron like a churchman checks his own breath for sin. We heard a sound under the wheels like a cat purring. Only bigger. Father said to leave the cart and be gone. On the way back, the ruts filled in behind us. The boy stared at his palms a long time before he stood. He left me a horseshoe nail, bent sideways as if something had tried to swallow it and failed. Found testimony to the widow Crane, undated. Mrs. Crane of Boone Hollow had come down to the city after her sister died. She recognized me without warmth. Nothing grows in that place, she said. Not since the Bartletts stirred what should not be stirred. We buried a hound once, good hound. Took rabbits clean. Set a stone over him so we might visit. Spring came, and the stone slid 6 inches before we saw it move. By harvest, it sat upright 10 feet away with no hands to lift it. The earth was full under it. We put our ears down and heard singing. She would not repeat the melody. When I walked her home, she hung sprigs of rosemary at her door and kept her hand on the latch until I was gone. Found testimony 3 a page. From the undertaker's book, copied by hand. The undertaker had no interest in me. He had more interest in a coin than a confession, but his apprentice allowed me time. With old records, if my eyes would do him, the kindness of reading allowed the lines he feared to see. January 2nd, 1890. Bartlett child came alone. Asked for 7 lengths of rope, 2 yards of burlap, 1 ring made of iron. Broken. January 7th, 1890. No livestock requested for winter slaughter from Boone Hollow. January 14th, 1890. Ledger entry corrected. Remove oxen from Bartlett account. Family insisted. No cuts, no bleed. I said this house buries bodies, does not bury problems. The man stared as if I were a ladder he meant to carry into his cellar. There was a smudge along that last line. A gray thumbprint that would not lift from the page. The Reverend's Bible. I found the Reverend's Bible in a second-hand stall by the river. Sold for 10 cents by a man who looked at it, as if the leather might bite. Inside the flyleaf, in a hurried hand, a message to no one or to me. The words that were before our words are knots we keep tying with our mouths. Boone, not a name. A noise, the sound of a throat clearing for song. 3 pressed leaves marked 3 verses that were not verses at all. But names. I knew too. The third I could not read without seeing my own face reflected in the gilt. Pages turn. A bell far away tolls once, then the hum resumes. Closer, the soil in my shoes. I should have fled the city for any place with stone to stand on. Instead, I took my boots down to the river to wash. The mud loosened in strings, thick as veins, when I wrung the leather. Water ran black into the current and made no ripple. I left the boots on the bank to dry. When I returned at dusk, they had moved an inch, then 3. Then to the very edge. As if toes pressed from within, I put them on and walked quickly. As if outrunning one's own feet were a thing men could do. That night, the hum rose through the solace and into my bones. and the floor sloped so plainly that my lamp slid toward the corner and went out against the baseboard with a soft, final sound. I lit no second lamp. Some lights invite things to see you. The road back by midsummer. The letters stopped. Silence can be a letter too. I lay awake listening to the boards count my breaths, and when I could bear it no more, I set out for Boone Hollow, with no better excuse than that a man ought not leave a door half open. The road remembered me. The ruts found the same. Ruts. The shadows kept their shape. At the edge of the valley. The air cooled. Ragwort crowded the ditch. A hawk circled, then shivered and went hard north as if pulled by a string. From the ridge, I saw what the thaw had left. The mill lay half swallowed. The wheel turned sideways like a jaw. The church was gone entirely, as if someone had erased it with a wet thumb. Of the houses, a few walls and a few chimneys remained, teeth in a jaw that did not belong to a man. The Bartlett farm stood. Of course it did. The house that waited. The porch roof had caved. Windows gaped like eyes that forgot how to blink. I stepped onto the boards and felt them lift a fraction, as if my weight were wanted. There was no bird song, only a breath, regular and low, that went on without me and would go on after. The kitchen table sat where I had left it. Only one new thing lay upon it. A ring of iron, broken. A faint smear of salt circled it, already damp with the wet of the room. I reached for the ring and stopped when the grain of the table shifted very slightly, very certainly toward my hand. "Mary," I said, and I do not know why I had voice at all. Footsteps, light as moths, crossed the ceiling. Then a child's laugh. Not happy and not cruel, the laugh of someone who knows a secret that keeps itself. "Did you bring me a story?" she asked from the stair. Her voice came from the wood, not the air. I answered like a fool answers a whisper in a graveyard. "Yes." "Good," said the voice on the stair. "Stories are food for the remembering." The root in the wall. Parlor wallpaper had lifted in long bubbles. I pressed my palm to one, and it beat back against my hand. I tore the paper slow, so the sound of ripping would not echo, and revealed a tangle of roots as fine as hair and as strong as wire. They had come through brick and lath, the way ivy slips through a fence. Each root pulsed with a faint, steady rhythm. If I leaned close, I could hear it keen. There were words scraped into the plaster beneath. A child's hand. A nail used for a pen. Fed. 7. Warm. Below. At the end of the last word. A crude drawing of a circle. Broken. The iron ring, made small by a small hand. The ledger without potpourri. Thought I wanted the ledger, the proof, but the house had a ledger of its own. Names written in wood with weight, in walls with damp, in floorboards with a bend that remembered where a man stood longest when he was alive. I could feel the lines tallying me. The room adjusted for my breath. "Not yet," I said, and it felt like speaking to a dog that stands at a door you will not open. "Soon," said the house, or perhaps the wind said it, and I gave the wind words because I needed something I could. Refuse. The sheriff's badge. I found the sheriff's badge in the ash of the stove. Bent. Polished by heat to a dull blue. Pinned to it with a sliver of root was a scrap of paper, half burned. The ink slurred by damp. Double quotes. Sealed. Broke. Fed. Listen. I slid the badge into my pocket and nearly retched when the heat of it moved. Not warmer, not cooler. Closer. I set it down on the table. The ring rolled an inch toward it and stopped, as if something underneath had pressed up. Curious. Evidence. Fragment. A page from Eliza's hand pressed against the back of the mantel, held by the weight of a loosened brick. I found a folded sheet. I asked for mercy and the ground said mercy is for those who forget. I asked for sleep and the ground said sleep is the name we give to our own burying. I asked for a price and the ground gave me 7. Then it asked for me. There was a smear where the me trailed into the paper, as if a wet finger had dragged through the ink, as if the word had been pulled. The barn door hung from a single hinge. The stalls were empty now, not of beasts, but of shape. The outlines of animals stood darker than the air around them. The way a wet stain darkens a floor, where the mare had once frozen. The boards had split, and a shallow crater lay beneath, lined with something that caught light without reflecting it. In the far corner, a child's skirt lay folded, dirty with the exact filth that children get into when they play where they are not allowed. Pinned to the hem was a note in a hard, uneven script. Down is where the knowing is. I did not open the cellar. The cellar opened me, in the sense that one knows when one's own breath is being counted by another. When lungs cease to feel private, I put my ear to the floor and heard water. I told myself, then wind. I told myself, then prayer. I told myself. Each lie gave out in turn. Hum rose with my pulse and matched it until I could not tell which one led. The decision that wasn't mine. I had brought with me a sack of rock salt and a can of kerosene. There are men who believe salt closes doors and fire makes them stay shut. Are men who tell themselves many things and then pour oil. I walked room to room with the can uncapped, drops falling dark, until the house smelled like lightning in the instant before it strikes. I marked the doors and the windows, the places where the paper breathed and the wood bent for a second set of steps. When I returned to the kitchen to strike the match, the iron ring lay in the doorway to the hall, as if a hand had dragged it there and set it like a brace against my leaving. There are choices that are not choices. I set the matchbook down. Not with fire, I said aloud. And my voice came back to me from the floor with a mouthful of dirt in it. The psalm of the root night came quickly. In Boone Hollow, darkness does not fall. It gathers. It pulled itself into the corners and took shape. Sat in the parlor and spoke the words I remembered from a church I no longer believed could keep itself standing. Yea, though I walk. The hum lifted to meet the old sentence, and something in the wall answered. The way a low voice in a choir will find the note beneath yours and hold it until your own breath fails. I spoke another verse, and the root in the plaster beat in time with the name of God. Then the beat became the name itself, which is to say, the beat became nothing a mouth should say if the mouth meant to stay human. From the floor below came a soft scrabbling, like mice. Then the long, slow pull of something bigger. Remembering how stairs work, I stood without standing the way one rises from a dream. I took the iron ring in both hands and felt it pull against me, as if it wanted to be a circle again, and I had not the strength to prevent it. Mary, I said. And the name was a candle, a small one, enough to make a shadow flee a single step. A child's voice. From the wall, from the root, from the little doll I could not see, and yet knew was somewhere in the room. Sighed. Mary is the name of a place. Place under is my name now. The field of mouth as I went out into the yard. The night air had teeth. The field that once held cattle lay smooth, as a tongue laid flat for the doctor every 7 steps. A small depression marked the earth, as if a knee had pressed there and prayed. In the center, the ground was higher by inches. I put my hand to it. It was warm. I lay my ear down. Kindness offered to the thing that had wanted it. From beneath, not words, but accounting a litany in a rhythm. 7 beats. A pause. 7 beats. A pause. I understood the meaning without language. The ground was keeping time with its hunger. I thought of my name. I knew how many letters it had. I did not wish to find out how many beats that would be. Wind skims the field. A far-off hymn that may be the river or may be breath. Evidence fragment. Sheriff's report. Never filed. I found the report in the barn loft. A sheaf of damp papers weighted with stones. The writing was cramped to save ink. The way men write when they fear time more than they fear economy. We sealed the cellar, and the seal gave back a little heat. Like a horse gives heat in winter. At dawn, we were 7 men. At sundown, we were 6. No hole in the ground. Only the memory of a hole in our feet, as if we had stepped into a place, and the place kept something of us for its own. At the bottom, a line added later in a different hand, a hand that did not know steadiness. Names slip down, don't carry. Names. There was a smear below the last. Word of names, as if the word had tried to go down too. Door you can't find twice. I lit no lamps. I stood in the doorway and listened. To the house sleep. You know a house sleeps when it begins to breathe. Without you. When your own breath feels like an echo of a breath. You did not take. I meant to leave. Then. Truly. But a rule kept itself in the room. You do not leave a door half open. I found myself unrolling the salt sack along the threshold to the cellar. The crystals took on the wet of the room, as if salt had thirst. As if the ground were a tongue. I spoke to the dark as a man speaks to a grave when he is fool enough to visit after sundown. I will come back with help, I said. Help is another word for food, the floor said. And there was no malice in it, which made it worse. The last thing I saw before I slept, I do not remember lying down. I do not remember closing my eyes. The hum settled me like a mother settles a child with her palm flat on the chest. I woke once to find the iron ring hole in my hands. Though I know it was broken, I woke again to find my hand inside the wall up to the wrist. The roots, slick, warm, patient. At dawn, the roots had withdrawn and left no mark. My skin smelled of rosemary and iron. On the table lay the doll. Its chest had been opened and sewn again. Red thread, 7 stitches. A note pinned where the heart would be. Stories are food, bring more. The leaving that wasn't. He left the house with the iron ring in my pocket. The yard watched me go. The path returned my steps to me. Sweeter than it had any right to be. At the ridge, I looked back. The house did not wave. Houses do not wave. The field breathed once. And the trees bowed as if in a wind that touched nothing else. In my pocket, the ring warmed. In my chest, something counted. 7 beats. A pause. I touched the badge. It was cold as a coin on the eye. I had every intention of riding to Charleston, to Pittsburgh, to the end of the map where water eats land and names wash thin. I turned my horse north and felt the ground lean politely. Like a host opening a door the way he prefers he opened. I stopped at the church that was no longer there. I stood where the bell had once spoken. I put the ring on the earth and the earth raised it back to my hand. There are decisions you do not make alone. There are roads that are not roads, only throats. I am writing this by the light of a day that never quite arrived. The air smells of rain that will not fall. The word below is a taste in my mouth I cannot spit. I came back to the city before noon and found my room lower by an inch. The window looks level if you look briefly. Do not look briefly. Over the course of this writing, the iron ring has turned a quarter. It faces the door now. I will go back once more, not to feed. To find the ledgers that are not books, and names that are not mine, and the door that calls itself a throat. And if I do not return, remember this. The ground does not want you. It wants what you bring. It wants what your stories hold between their teeth. The hollow remembers. The root remembers. The ledger remembers. If you read this aloud, you remember for it. There are winters that come and go. And there are winters that remember you. That last year, the frost followed me north. It clung to the edges of my coat long after I left the valley. I would shake snow from my shoulders in rooms where no snow had ever fallen. I kept the iron ring on the mantel, telling myself it was evidence, not invitation. But every night the thing turned only a hair's breadth, but always toward the window, as though listening for the wind that still carried Boone Hollow's hum. The city said it was the coldest season in 20 years. I knew better. It wasn't weather. It was return. The dream that bled through sleep came thin. Each night began the same, a field of white, breath freezing in the air, and underfoot a sound like cloth tearing slow. When I woke, the pillow was damp, the sheet gritty with soil. Once I found a stem of black root in my hair brittle, smelling faintly of rosemary and iron. I burned it in the stove. The smoke curled the wrong direction, down. I started writing everything, each hum, each small shift of shadow, hoping that words might fence the thing in. But ink is soil too. It grows what you feed it. A visitor in Ash on the third night of February. Someone knocked at my door. The sound came soft, deliberate. 7 times. When I opened it, no one stood there, only a drift of snow. Pure white against the soot-black street. In its center, a single child's footprint faced inward. I found a parcel at the threshold, wrapped in burlap. Inside, the ledger. The pages were new. Blank. At the bottom of the first, a line already written in red. The ground is hungry for memory. Write. The ink that moved. I kept the ledger closed, but at night it whispered, paper shifting, a quill scratching though my hands lay still. When dawn came, a sentence had appeared. The story is how it feeds. That morning the river froze solid. Though the sky promised spring, I went to the university, to a professor of folklore who had once studied burial songs of the old mountains. He listened without blinking, then drew a symbol on a scrap of paper, a circle broken at the bottom, the same shape carved into the Bartlett cellar stones. It's older than English, he said, not prayer, record. They believed every word spoken into the earth became a seed. He folded the page and handed it back. It was warm from his palm. And when I looked again, the ink was wet, though his pen was dry. He died that night. They said his heart failed mid-lecture. He'd been reading from an old hymn, 7 lines, the return to Boone. Hollow, I told myself, I went to bury the ring and burn the ledger. Truth is, I went because the letters had started again, always the same line, written in a child's hand on scraps of old newspaper. The field wants its story. Snow fell heavier the farther south I rode. By the time I reached the ridge, the drifts swallowed the fence posts. No bird cried, no branch cracked. Even the wind held its breath. The Bartlett house stood unbroken, though months of weather should have torn it apart. The windows glowed faintly, red as coals seen through fog. I left the horse at the road. It would not move closer. It trembled once and knelt, as if bowing to something it could not see. The house under snow inside. Time had stopped. The fire still burned in the hearth, though no one tended it. The doll sat in the rocker by the window, head tilted, thread mouth smiling. The hum came from the chimney, now slow. Satisfied, I laid the ledger on the table and the ring beside it. For a moment the air stilled, waiting. Then the floor pulsed. The boards swelled and sank like a living chest. Each breath exhaled ash. I spoke aloud, though my throat was dry as bone. Take it. Take the ring, the names, the story. Let it end. The fire dimmed. The room answered in Mary's voice. Stories don't end. They root. The descent. The trapdoor opened without touch. Warm air rose, wet, sweet, the scent of rot and honey. I carried the lantern down. The stone lid lay shattered where I'd left it, but the pit had grown wider. The walls no longer wept. They pulsed, slow and steady, veins in a sleeping beast. At the bottom, a pool of dark water reflected the flame without trembling. In it, I saw faces: Thomas, Eliza, Mary, then my own, eyes hollow, mouth moving, though I said nothing. The surface rippled once, and the reflection smiled back. Every story needs a witness, it whispered. You wrote mine. I dropped the ring into the pool. It sank without sound. The humming stopped. For the first time since that winter, there was silence, real silence. The kind that comes before the first breath of something new. Then the earth exhaled. The harvest I woke outside. Half buried in snow. The farmhouse was gone. In its place, a field of frost-white roots stretched to the horizon, trembling under the moon like veins of some great creature sleeping just beneath the skin of the world. Where the chimney had been, a single sprout had pushed through the ice-black, leafless, yet alive. Its tip glowed faintly red. I heard a child humming beneath the wind, a tune that followed no melody I knew. Every step I took away from the field, the hum grew louder, until I realized it came from inside me. My breath steamed not white but gray. Each exhale tasted of soil. The last entry back in Charleston. Spring came early, or so the papers claimed. Snow melted in a single night. The river swelled and turned the color of old blood. Men said it was clay runoff from the mountains. I know better. The ledger sits open on my desk as I write this. New pages bloom each morning, thin and damp. Every word I set down dries and red. Sometimes, when I pause, another hand continues the line for me, neat, patient, smaller than mine. The ground remembers. The ground is me. I hear the humming again now, faint but near. It comes through the walls, through the solace of my boots, through the pulse in my wrists. It counts. 7 beats. Pause. 7 beats. Pause. I understand it now. It is not a warning. It is invitation. If this account is found, close the book. Do not read it aloud. Do not speak the hollow's name, because winter is not a season in Boone Hollow. It is a hunger. And hunger remembers. Epilogue. Archivist's Note, 1903. This manuscript was discovered in the Charleston Historical Society archives, sealed within an unmarked box. The author's name was never recorded. The paper remains damp to the touch, and the ink, though nearly 20 years old, appears freshly written each morning.